So we're going to talk, like I mentioned a minute ago, but in case somebody new popped in, about how when school use the Global Read Aloud to bring the world to their students and develop empathy. So I am Joy Boudreau, and I guess I could go ahead and skip to the next one because that has my information on it. So I am a school librarian in Central Indiana, and as you might be able to see, I'm kind of not in my normal element right now. So while I am in Central Indiana, right now I'm in Ohio visiting my in-laws, and I'm in my father-in-law's workshop, so you might see a lot of like random tools and whatnot behind me. So they're letting me use their workshop to kind of, you know, so I don't have my little children yelling in the background or something. But that's where I'm presenting from today. But I am a teacher librarian. I've been a teacher librarian for 3 years. And before that, I was a middle school English teacher for 5 years. And so this past year was my first year working with Global Read Aloud, and I just became a huge fan. And that was really a launching pad for me to get interested in SDGs and global collaboration and all sorts of other things that we'll talk about as we go. And two, a lot of things I used Pictochart to make this, and so a lot of these things are linkable that you'll see throughout the presentation. So they're hyperlinked, and then they'll take you to the other places that I'll mention or we'll chat about. So the first thing, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I figure half the people that are listening to this already know what the Global Read Aloud is, but I also realize half the people might not. So just a quick introduction to what is the Global Read Aloud. So the Global Read Aloud, I'm going to put, and yes, I can put the link to this in the chat too. And the link is in, I just put it in the chat, and it is in the Sketch page, and I did just put it in the notes page too. And I can also add some other things to the notes page if we need them. But most of the links you would need to hopefully be in the presentation. But if something else comes up, I can certainly share that too. And then I'm going to share this page too, which is linked from the presentation. But, you know, if you want to take a peek at it now without having to find it. So this is the Global Read Aloud if you're new to it. So it's just kind of their big kind of overview that she sent out in May about like, hey, if you haven't done it before and you're interested in signing up, like this is what it is. So that is Pernille Rip, and she is a teacher originally from Denmark, but she teaches up in Wisconsin. She teaches middle school English, and she started this back in 2010. And she just had this vision of a whole bunch of people reading the same book and having conversations about it. And then over the last 7 seasons, I think they've done it 7 times now, and they do it in the fall, more and more people participate each year. And there have been thousands and thousands of people in over, I think, 86 countries now that have participated in this. And somehow I hadn't heard of it until 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, I approached some people about it, but there just wasn't time or interest at that point. So then this past year, my diversity equity committee that I'm on in my building, they had some different goals they were talking about with empathy and, you know, looking at the world around our kids outside of, you know, the town in Indiana they live in and all of those things. And so I thought of the Global Read Aloud. And so we worked at it from the diversity equity kind of angle to reach some goals we had for the school and wanting to develop empathy in our kids. And so we picked a book for 5th through 8th grade to read that we thought would work. And so last year we worked with Long Walk to Water, which I'll talk more about. But so here, you know, she goes through, you know, her goal and the basics. How do you sign up? And it's all linked with different things, so you can go to wherever you need. It's super easy to sign up and see details. And she has pretty much any piece of information that you need to really get started is on the Global Read Aloud website. But two, they're a really responsive community. So, you know, if you tweet out using the hashtags, which I'll talk about, or they have Facebook pages this year, which I'll mention more in a minute. But, you know, you reach out to people through those venues too, like they'll help you, they want to help you out. They, you know, last year I was a newbie, there were times I was asking questions and people were helping me out. So by all means, you know, feel free to do that. So their set timeline, they kick off October 1st. And so that's when they'll start the books and the conversations, but don't feel like you necessarily have to stick to their 6-week timeline, because I know that there were schools last year that didn't. And my school tried really hard to stick to that timeline, and I think most classes did, but I think a couple classes maybe got a little off. But you know, there were definitely some schools that extended it outside of that time, or started a little early or started a little late. So, you know, whatever you need to do to make it work for you. Okay. And each year they pick some different titles. So these are the titles this year, because it just depends, you know, what is your age group and what are your goals, right? Because you want to get the right book for you. Now, that being said, you know, Pernille Ripp, who created this, right, she's a big advocate of this, and I've become a believer in it too, that, you know, just because it's a picture book doesn't mean that has to be just for the elementaries, right? So other people could use that, right? So, I mean, on one hand, you don't want to pick like the young adult book and read it to an elementary crowd, because that probably wouldn't go over well. But, you know, there are times where I even talked to a teacher at a conference this summer who was thinking about using one of the middle school books with one of her high school classes, because she thought it would be a better fit for that group of kids. So don't feel like you necessarily have to pick the one with your age group. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a consideration. So age groups or your topics and goals. Okay, so for picture books and illustrators this year, I highlighted a couple things on the website I wanted to point out. So with these picture books, I'm not personally familiar with them and haven't gotten to read them yet, but they sound really good. And it talks about voices and art forms of Indigenous writers and changing with bringing more focus to that this year. And 2 incredible writers are sure to become heart books that stay with us long after it is over. And then there's information about each of those books with pictures of them. A Boy Called Bat is the early reader choice. So that would be like a beginner chapter book choice, right? So probably maybe middle or late elementary, but again, you know, you can move that up or down depending on what you think would be helpful to your kids. It's about this boy who wants a pet skunk, and it talks about how others would like to label him as different. He doesn't see himself as different, and how sometimes, you know, we label people. And so it talks about that. A Mall Unbound is the upper elementary middle grade book. I just finished that book. It is amazing. Even if you don't use it for Global Read Aloud or for anything, I just recommend reading it. It's about this girl who lives in Palestine, and her family ends up owing the wrong person money, and he's not a very nice landowner, and she becomes an indentured servant, and she just wants to go to school and dreams of becoming a teacher. And now she's stuck in this really bad situation, not going to school anymore and working for this not nice man. And I definitely felt a lot of anger while reading it, but that's a good thing. And it opens our eyes to problems around us, and things that are still ongoing that people think aren't. And then the middle school junior high choice, this is the one that my school will be using this year, since I work in a 5 through 8 building. Alan Gratz's Refugee, and I know he's been a really popular author in general with middle school students, at least where I am, with his historical fiction. And this book combines 3 different kids' stories. So you have a boy who was a refugee during the Holocaust and was Jewish at that time. You have a girl who is in Cuba in the 90s, and her family's trying to leave. And then you have a boy in Syria in modern day whose family is trying to get out. So you have 3 different kids, 3 different time periods, all trying to leave and go to a different home in a different place. And we all know there's been a lot about refugees and immigrants and different things in the news. So it's definitely a timely topic. And then the young adult choice is Love, Hate, and Other Filters, which I haven't gotten to read yet, but I've heard really good things about it. And it talks about how it's a story about fitting in, finding yourself, and being vilified. So this is kind of a quick rundown of this year's books, just because if you hadn't had a chance to go through them yet, One of those might have stood out to you to being like, oh, I think that would work for me, or oh, I think that would work for this teacher that I'm friends with, or oh, you know, different things like that to get the ball rolling. So those are the different books. Okay, and then 2 here on this GRA resources slide, there's the direct link to sign up, the link I was just on about the titles, weekly breakdowns. So like I mentioned, she has recommended breakdowns over that 6-week period of, you know, read these chapters or these pages or this picture book this week and this one this week. So that way you can connect with other classes, and I promise I'll get to how to connect with other classes and all that good stuff here really, really soon in like a minute. But if you want to see kind of what her breakdowns are to try to stay close to where other people are, that's how you do that. Now, there are definitely some benefits with staying on the same page as other people, because like last year, I know we participated in some of the Global Read Aloud Twitter chats. So, you know, the questions about week 4 were whatever people had read up to that point. So like if your kids hadn't read that point, then, you know, there might be some spoilers. At the same time, if you're behind, then maybe you backtrack to the week before that and you're just responding to the prior week's questions, you know, so you can make that work for you. And again, if you need to start a little earlier, a little later, or extend it, you know, by all means, do that. So it's just kind of what works for you. Okay. And then this was the other page I just showed that has all the information about how to sign up and if you're new to it, and the hashtags. GRA18 is going to be the main hashtag for this year, but there's also individual hashtags for different books, which I'll mention, I think, here in a little bit too. And then her blog and Twitter and Facebook has more information as well. Okay, cool. So why? So these were our big 3 reasons for doing Global Read Aloud. I already touched on the first one about wanting our kids to develop more empathy. So I did not grow up in an affluent area. Where I grew up was very much blue collar working class. But the school that I teach in is a pretty affluent area. And a lot of our kids, not all of our kids by any means, but a lot of our kids have a lot. And they don't always see things that are happening outside of the area. And they don't always understand the struggle that people that might not have their lifestyle or live in other places or what have you have. And so that's really where the diversity groups to develop more empathy in our kids came from. And also just more empathy, yes, with the world, also with each other. Being in a 5 through 8 building, a lot of times our 5-6 is separate from our 7-8. And so kind of finding a common thing that they could talk about and maybe even collaborate on and work on together, which also ties into our last one about school community. So making more of those bonds, making some cross-curricular connections, you know, having 5th graders know 8th graders and building some connections there. And then the one in the middle, just kind of building that global citizenship. So, you know, seeing the world outside of you, communicating with them, knowing how to appropriately communicate with them, you know, and you could tie it into all sorts of things like just citizenship in general, digital citizenship, digital leadership, global awareness. There's all sorts of different angles you can approach that with. But there are a lot of other reasons to join the Global Read Aloud. I know like one kid just told me he just liked being read to because, you know, he's in middle school now and teachers might not read to him anymore depending on what teachers you have. And he just likes being read to. So that was one of the more simple responses we have. But, you know, there's no harm in liking it for those reasons too. So the starting point would be pick and get a title, which I already talked about, right? So think about what works for your age levels, what your goals are, what you want to accomplish with it. You know, try to have it be something that you can, you know, integrate a little bit each day. So something that will work with your schedule, right? While there are a lot of extension activities with Global Read Aloud to connect with other classes and communicate, at the same time, people often, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. People often don't want the Global Read Aloud to feel like every other book we teach, right? Like we're not necessarily giving quizzes over it, and we're not necessarily analyzing every detail. And as a former English teacher, I know that there's a time and place for those things. So, you know, don't get mad at me for saying that. But, you know, with Global Read Aloud, it's supposed to be more about just, at least in my mind, and maybe not everybody's, but to my school, it was more about, you know, just the experience of everybody reading the same book, and then having some of those collaboration experiences and cross-curricular tie-ins, or teachers mention it, or those types of things, but not necessarily having it be something they're, you know, tested over or quizzed over, something like that. And we just had our teachers, you know, we told our teachers, like, hey, these are the chapters we're doing it this week. And teachers broke it up how they wanted to. So some teachers did it a little bit each day. Like maybe they read 5-10 minutes each day. Or maybe they blocked out, like, okay, I'm going to do all of my reading on Wednesday, or half on Tuesday and half on Thursday. You know, whatever works with your schedule. Gathering support. So if this is something that you want to do by yourself, you might not need to gather support, except maybe, you know, getting parents and kids on board. But if it's something you want to do like as a team, or a department, or a grade level, or a school, you're going to need support, and you're going to need somebody to start with, right? So whether that's a, you know, department chair head, or principal, or committee, or diversity group, or we also have a pause group, and they work a lot with like bullying and positive image and those types of things. So, you know, some of those books might fit in more with them than us, just not the ones we've chosen so far. But I mean, you could also approach it from that angle. So yeah, just, you know, if you want to gather support, you know, find that one person, and then it'll multiply into more people. So I approached the diversity committee, and we got the principal on board. He was very supportive from the get-go, and then, you know, other people came in from there. And if you want to do it by yourself, I mean, all the power to you. You do not have to have a group of people in your building to do this. If you're the only person in your building doing this, that's totally fine, because there's a whole online community of people you can connect with and have these conversations with. So whatever works for you. All right, and then just kind of planning and exploring. So with the Global Read Aloud, one thing I learned last year, you do not have to have the entire thing planned out before you start, right? I mean, it'd be good to know what you're reading when, right? But some of the activities, yes, especially some of the early ones, you might want to have planned out ahead of time, but some of them might just pop up as you go, which I'll also talk more about when I give some examples here in a minute. And I see Katie asked about when the selection will be finalized. So those books that I went over a few minutes ago, those are the final selections for this year. So each year they always have one book, multiple in the picture books, right? But one book in the other age levels. So that is the final list. So they start having voting. I'm trying to remember when voting was. Maybe February or March, where she kind of narrows it down, like, hey, these are the 5 young adult books I'm thinking about. These are the 5 middle grade books I'm thinking about. These are the 5 whatever books I'm thinking about. And then you can vote to try to influence what gets picked. You can also make suggestions too. So I know that there's a place on her website where you can make suggestions. Like if you know of a book you think she should consider for the 2019 Global Read Aloud, you can make a suggestion for that. But yeah, so that is the final list for this year's 2018. So you can just pick whichever one of those on those pages that I talked about that work for you. And two, if you're interested in what other ones were being considered, just because you want to read it or you think they might be some interesting books, there's a place to find those on her blog as well. All right, and then the last thing, just like start, right? So read, do, make, discuss, connect, share, and we'll talk more about those parts as we go here. So finding connections. So that's the reason a lot of people do Global Read Aloud, right? Besides, you know, reading an awesome book is connecting with other people, right? That's a lot of times the purpose behind why people want to do that. So in the past, especially last year, I know I found some of my connections through Edmodo, but it sounds like Edmodo is being phased out this year. But I did see in my Long Walk to Water group that I was in on Edmodo last year, I saw a couple people recently posted about Refugee. So I don't know if there's a chance that some things are going to be happening on Edmodo, but I don't think much will be. So that's why I just kind of put it at the bottom with a question mark. She made a main Facebook group for each grade level this year. So that's a new thing. So there's one for like the middle grade pick, and one for the early chapter book, and one for the young adult book, and everything like that. And all of those are linked from that, that new to the Global Read Aloud page. You can find all of the links to the different Facebook groups right there. So that was in this one, which is the one I copied into the chat, and it's also on one of those earlier slides that I showed. Okay, and then Twitter. So with the hashtags, right? So again, the main one is going to be GRA18, but there will also be specific hashtags for each book, which is also on this page. So this page that I copied into the chat has pretty much everything you need to know just about for getting started. And so like there's the hashtags this year. So like I'm doing refugee, so I'll be using GRA refugee a lot in addition to GRA 18. So that would be another way to share out what I'm doing, but also to find connections with other teachers or search for what other people are doing. Too, I know that last year at some point there was a, I think it was a Google Sheet that was shared out for Long Walk to Water, and people were signing up for, and I think I just found it through Twitter or Edmodo, and somebody posted it, and then people were just adding in, you know, like signing up for different weeks to lead the Twitter chat, or sharing resources they found, or different things. And two, I'll talk about how I made some of my connections too as I went last year, and hopefully this year I'll find even more. And two, keep in mind, like I think sometimes when people learn about the Global Read Aloud or doing it for the first time, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and feel like you need to do everything, and you totally don't. So it's totally make it what you want it, right? So if you want to build, you know, connections through this tool or that tool, or you want to, you know, just find one school to partner with or one classroom, or you want to find a bunch of different partners. I mean, it's whatever you want to make it. So by all means, you know, feel free to start out small. Feel free to just try like one or two new tools or one or two connections. And then if you want to try more, cool. If you want to wait until next year, like that's fine. It's completely do what you're comfortable with program. And she even talks about that on your website, right? Some people go crazy with the connections, some people don't. I mean, it's, you know, everybody's trying to get connections, but to what extent definitely varies. So do what works for you, okay? So one of the ways that I'm gonna talk now for a second about 3 of the tools that I used that worked well for me to build connections. So I was trying to facilitate connections for my entire building, 5 through 8. So it was a little different for me. If you're a classroom teacher, you can make some even more meaningful and deeper connections, because you can find some classrooms that are close to your kids in age, right? They don't have to be the exact same age, but maybe close, and like they could have, you know, like Skype conversations or Google Hangouts, or they could talk and get together multiple times, right? So then you could go even more in depth with it. And I'm hoping some of my teachers will do that this year. But last year was our first time, and I was trying to help lead and facilitate a lot of the tech side of things to not make it stressful for people and add more to their plates. So we'll see what happens next year. But anyway, so one of the tools that I used was Padlet. So when we were getting started with Long Walk to Water, if you're not familiar with it, it takes place in South Sudan. Well, really it was just Sudan at the time, but it was during the civil war that led to South Sudan. And that follows Salva's storyline, and then part of the storyline takes place in modern South Sudan and follows Naya. And so a lot of our kids didn't know a lot about that civil war or even Sudan in general. So we started off trying to build context. So I had the kids work on some research resource skills in the library one day, different classes, different days, and then they posted to this Padlet page about, different topics so they could pick, do they want to learn about Sudan, South Sudan, what did they want to learn about, share what you learned, read what other people learned, and so on. And the first day it was just my kids posting, right? So like they were cool with it, and they found it interesting, but it wasn't, as neat because they couldn't see other people yet. But then by day 3, they were starting to see other people's comments. And that's when things really got interesting for my kids, because they saw other people in other places are reading this, which is another thing that I love about Global Read Aloud. Your kids have an authentic audience, right? So they're not just putting these answers out there for them or for you or for the teacher or for whoever. Other people in other places, teachers, schools, classroom students are going to read this and look at this. And so all I did with this Padlet I made, I just shared out the link and I used the hashtags on Twitter, and maybe I posted it, I don't know, maybe twice. It wasn't a ton. And then I posted it to the Edmodo group last year, right? So this year I probably posted it to the Facebook group instead, right? And that's all I did. And then people just started showing up. And some people told me like, oh, I'm going to get on this tomorrow, or oh, I'm going to get on this next week, or oh, I'm going to whatever. And that's fine. Like they could come whenever they could. But I was just amazed at how many people responded. So, keep an eye out. A lot of people will share out links or resources, and you can also make your own, right? Like I did it, and share it out with people, and you'll get people to hop on board. So it's definitely a very active community once it kicks off. So again, it kicks off October 1st, but I'm sure I guarantee there'll be people looking for connections before that. And looking for different resources and different things. So you have some different options. And then later on, I did another one that I posted on Padlet. And this was one I didn't plan ahead of time, but we got in some VR headsets, and I found a really cool film in VR through the Within app called The Displaced. And 2, if you end up doing refugee, you could totally use that 360 video with that too. And it's on a website or the app. We probably won't use it again because we used it last year. But yeah, and I also found a water calculator, which was an idea I actually got from another teacher on Twitter. And so my kids had the option like, hey, do you want to watch this 360 video, or do you want to do the water calculator? Which was also just really mind-blowing for our kids about how much water they use over the course of a day. Twitter and Twitter chats. So there were a lot of Twitter chats happening different weeks. So with Long Walk to Water last week and a lot of the books, I know there were different chats each week that people signed up to lead. So if that's something you're interested in, you could sign up early to lead one, or you could just participate in them, right? And it's okay if you're not participating during that week, right? And they're slow chats. So just questions will be released over the course of the week and you respond to them. It doesn't have to be right at that moment. If you respond to them, a couple weeks later, that's still totally fine. But again, one of the biggest things I noticed when I had my kids working on responding to these questions was how much thought they put into their answers. Like they put a lot of thought into their answers because 1, they had to keep in mind how many characters they were going to use, which they aren't always used to. But 2, they knew that I was going to tweet a lot of these out, right? Now, did I tweet out every single one? No, but I tweeted out a lot of them. And so they knew that, and they knew that I was going to tweet them out, and they knew that it was going to go to an audience, and they knew other people were going to see them. Other people might respond to them. They knew they could look at other people's answers. And then 2, during week 4, we ended up, the person who was going to lead week 4 never posted questions. So something popped up in their lives. And so I told my kids, like, you know what? We're going to come up with questions for week 4. And so we kind of took over and hijacked week 4. So sorry, whoever was supposed to lead that, but there weren't any questions there. So we came up with our own and led that week's chat. So through my account, I posted the questions, and then through the library account, I posted the kids' answers. Now, clearly you don't need 2 Twitter accounts to do that. That's just how I decided to do it. And I have one for me and one for the library. The kids don't care about my PD stuff. So I keep the 2 separate. And then this is just like the template I used when the kids were looking at it. And then with Flipgrid, so Bronwyn Joyce is a teacher from Australia, and I became a big fan of Flipgrid last summer, and she was a name that I definitely heard, and then I heard about her What If Flipgrid, and that was one of those things where I'm like, I need to do that at some point, but I don't know when it's going to fit in, right? So I just kind of like tucked it in my back pocket for later. And then when we decided to move forward with Long Walk to Water and we're working on it, I knew that she had a lot of topics related to world issues, related to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we'll talk more about later, and related to all of those things. And so I went on her grid, and this will link you to it. So that's linked to her Twitter, right? So again, just lots of things throughout this presentation are linked. If you just kind of like wave over them, right? So Flipgrid's linked, her Twitter's linked, and What If Flipgrid. So if I go to the What If Flipgrid, and then the password is just what if, all lowercase. So, let me show you. What if, there we go. So she just has tons and tons of topics, and her students from Australia respond, and people from all over the world respond. And so I looked through the topics. I didn't necessarily pick her most recent ones. I went with the ones that fit best. But I mean, you certainly could. But I went with the ones that fit best with the book we were doing. So I found one about what refugees pack in their backpack, which again would actually tie in really well with refugee, although we use it for Long Walk to Water, because Salva ended up being a refugee as well. But also there was one about a girl who walks for water every day, like miles and miles and miles. So those were the two that our kids used. And so they got to, I had them listen and watch, people from other parts of the world respond, and then add their own response. Oh, there's the water one. And so there's lots of different topics. And two, I mean, even outside of the Global Read Aloud, this is just, I think, a really cool resource that might fit into other things that different curriculums or teachers are doing. So it's just a really cool place that houses a lot of ideas and teachers and classrooms giving feedback. So that was another thing that I had my kids participate in. Okay, so some other tools that I know that folks have talked about with Global Read Aloud. So I have not used these with Global Read Aloud specifically myself, but I know that other people in the Global Read Aloud community have talked about them. And these are all linked too. So I know people have talked about Kid Blog and Write About, which are both just environments for kids to post their writing and share their writing and have other people look at them and respond and those types of things. I think on that basis, they're pretty similar, but I'm sure they function differently. Also, Skype and Google Hangout, right? Kind of same thing, right? They have kind of the same purpose, but they're going to function differently. But those would be ways for your kids to have, if you had a partner who was maybe not too far off from your time zone, then Skype or Google Hangout would be a really cool way to connect. If you had somebody that was like way off on a time zone from you, but you wanted to have some video interaction, then, I would go with Flipgrid, which I mentioned a minute ago. So, I mean, I know I focused on Bronwyn Joyce's What If Flipgrid, but Flipgrid is just, I mean, if you haven't checked out one of the Flipgrid sessions for EdChange Global, and if you haven't ever seen Flipgrid before, I really recommend it just to try it out and see how the tool works, because it's definitely one of my favorite ed tech tools right now. So I recommend trying it out if you haven't, for sure. All right, so some of my goals this year that I would like to see us do differently, just as a school as we go into this year too. Earlier rollout. So last year, there was, for a lot of different reasons, there was a lot of last minute planning and things happening. So this year we want to, give our staff more information sooner and roll things out earlier and make sure people feel really ready to go. And, so just earlier everything. Empowerment. So we want to find some ways to empower our teachers a little bit more to, yeah, the whole school is doing this, but what do you want to do with it? How do you want to maybe have your kids connect to other people, or how do you see this maybe tying into your curriculum, right? So while, we don't necessarily want our teachers giving like a test over refugee, right? Like, how could this fit in to a STEM project? like, you know, could they use design thinking and try to solve a character's problem? Or, you know, maybe it could tie into current events and social studies class, or geography and different parts of the world, right? So just kind of finding some natural connections to different subject areas, and people to maybe try out some things on their own that they're interested in, or maybe tying things with that teacher's passions. So there might be some different ways to do that. And then my other big goal is more SDG tie-in, which is Sustainable Development Goals. So if you haven't heard about Sustainable Development Goals, you need to, although odds are if you're on EdChange Global, you have, because lots of people have been mentioning them today, and a lot of people on here are all about global collaboration and thinking. But this here is linked to this actual tweet, where they have all these different links and resources from Teach SDGs. So they say like, hey, this is the starter kit. Here's how to learn about it and what they are. This takes you to the Teach SDGs website, and this takes you to the global goals for sustainable development. So one thing I did do last year, I did find connections to goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, while we were reading Long Walk to Water. I also printed out little like miniature posters of all of these icons and sustainable development goals that I found under their resources, and hung them up in the library. So those were good baby steps, but I really want to go further with the sustainable development goals. I want to, you know, look more around and play around with the Teach SDGs website. I want to check out Empatigo and Beluga. I want to look more at the world's largest lessons and what might fit in with different things with or without Global Read Aloud, and just find more connections for the SDGs, because I think that that's a really powerful thing that's happening right now, and I want to be more involved in that, and for our kids to be more aware of that. So these, I'm not going to read through all of these, but these were some takeaways that our staff shared about the Global Read Aloud. So some of their takeaways. And we did have a group, I will mention this one that talks about Wishes for Wells. We did have a group of 6th graders that just really ran with it, and their teacher let them, and their teacher empowered them, which was awesome. And their teacher basically gave them genius hour time to work on this project. And they basically tried to come up with their own nonprofit, Wishes for Wells, and started selling bracelets and hosting a movie night and doing some really cool things to try to raise money to help out people who don't have access to clean water. So that was just amazing to see them take it and run with it. And we do want to try to do more too as a building, to find some different partnerships or organizations locally that fit in with different topics and different books for the Global Read Aloud. So that's something that we want to work on this year as well. There was one teacher who was really negative on this survey, but you know, like, and you know, even if you're like a lone wolf trying this, you know, I mean, there might be one person, right, like in your department or in your school that's like, why are you doing that, or what's that about, right? And you got to tune them out, because you know what's best for your kids, and it's a great experience. And it's one of the best educational experiences I've had. And I love it to death. So just ignore it, okay? But we had, I think, out of like 47 teachers that responded to our survey, 44 were like, yes, I definitely want to do it again next year. And the other ones were like, no, or maybe. But those were really good numbers. So I'm good with that. And the kids were definitely a fan. So these were some students. A couple of these aren't even, like, these top 3 aren't even my students. These were students from other places that responded to the water one. They just had some cool things to say about it, opening their eyes or different things. And these are different things that kids ask me, like, do I have any books like A Long Walk to Water? That's definitely a question that a librarian would want to hear. This was one of my favorites. I like that they can relate even when their cultures are different. So they liked that, like, that they could relate to other kids and they could relate to them. The characters could relate to each other, and just finding those connections. So tips. So find your champions, which I kind of mentioned earlier when I talked about the support thing, right? So find a champion, whether it's a parent or a kid or a colleague. If you think you need a champion, which maybe you don't, and you're just gonna go do your own thing and be awesome, then cool. But if you think you need a champion, then find one. And you'll definitely be able to. And two, on the Global Read Aloud website, they even have letter templates that you can send home if you want to talk to parents about this, or maybe you want the parents to be a part of it. Like we didn't even ask any parents to be a part of this, but we had parents, we put it like on the school newsletter, or kids were talking about at home, and we had parents be like, I'm going to read that with you, or I'm going to read that too. I want to know what it's about. So that was really cool. But yeah, they have letters, or you could put it in a classroom newsletter, or, whatever, and, tell the parents what's going on. Or, and obviously they're not required to read it, but if they want to read it, or if they want to participate or have a conversation with their child, I mean, that makes it even better, right? Connect. So again, that's part of the motive behind Global Read Aloud, right? So find a connection. If you want to just find one to start out with, or you just want to use a specific platform, then that's fine. But, use it as an opportunity to connect, because it's not often that you get this many people reading the same book at the same time from all different countries and parts of the world and countries. So, take advantage of it, right? It's okay to steer off course. So there were some things that, we originally planned on doing that we scrapped, or things I didn't plan on doing, but then picked up later. So, it's okay to adjust plans as you go. It does not have to be, every activity connection does not have to be planned out when you start, because you'll see more and more people share things, or you might get an idea as people are going. So obviously you want to have the beginning planned out. I don't want to tell you to not be prepared or procrastinate, but it's okay to come up with some of the rest later. Letting the students' passions and ideas drive things. So I mentioned the one group with wishes for whiles too. I know there was an 8th grade English teacher, shout out to Ashley Cooper, because she was a huge, this wouldn't have happened without her. She's the diversity equity head for my building. She supported this idea. She kicked it off to staff. She helped lead it from the get-go. So she's amazing. But anyway, she also told me not long ago, we presented on this together at a conference earlier this summer, and there was a day where I was talking I'm trying to remember what topic it was. Oh, I know, it was the VR one. So where they were talking about the refugee VR video. So they looked at through the eyes of 3 different refugees, 3 different countries in modern times, and also the water calculator. So the kids were still talking about those refugees and what they saw in that video, and asking questions, and curious about things. And so the day after they came to the library, she's like, all right, let's go learn about this. And so they just learned about that, and she let them run with it that day and research things and ask questions and answer questions. And so that was really cool. Kind of what I already mentioned, don't kill the reading part, right? So just while the kids are listening, just let them listen would be my recommendation. And, do extensions and find cool connections, or find curriculum tie-ins, but don't actually drill them or test them over the book itself. That's not what the purpose is of this particular case. And then take what others have made. People share freely. Take it, run with it, make it your own thing, tweak it, whatever works for you. And along those same lines, if you make something that, even if it's not something you want other people to add to or contribute to, like maybe it's just, I don't know, an activity you did or something, take a picture, share a link, put it out there, use the hashtags. It'll help other people get ideas, and it'll help you be a part of the community. So yeah, that was a whole lot of me talking. So has anybody else, does anybody have questions, or maybe you have tried something with Global Read Aloud, or something you want to try, or you have a question about how to make it work for you? I'm happy to.
Hey, Joanne, sorry if you mentioned this earlier, but did you get multiple copies of the books? And if you did, how did you work out funding for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with that, Let me, I can stop my sharing so we can just look at people. So with that, I mean, if you're doing it like just with, I mean, I'll talk about the library aspect because I know you're in the library like me. But if you're just doing it like in your classroom as a classroom teacher, you really just need one copy of the book. Like, you know, one copy of Refugee or Love, Hate, and Other Filters or Boy Called Bad or whatever. You just need one copy because you're reading it out loud, right? So you don't really need multiple copies because you're not doing close annotations or anything like that with it. The kids aren't reading it on their own. What we did, though, because we were trying to do it as a whole school, we got a copy of the book for each teacher. So we got one copy for each teacher. So like this year for Refugee, I think we had to get, I'm trying to remember, it was around 70 copies. I don't remember the exact number, although I'm in a huge building. But we had to get around 70 copies of that. But I lucked out with Refugee, and it was on sale. It might still be. It was on sale on Scholastic Book Club website for pretty cheap. And the principal, who was very supportive of this, which, I mean, if you're going to do this as the whole school, odds are you're going to need the principal's support. He was willing to use some money that he had for it. Now, because of how passionate I am about it, I was definitely considering using part of my library funds for it, although, you know, I was hoping to not. But he did. And I think the year before, when we did Long Walk to Water, PTO helped us fund it. But again, if you're doing it in just one classroom, you just need one copy. So yeah, good question. So yeah, I don't know if anybody else has, I know that we have like 10 minutes left ish. Not that you have to stay for those whole 10 minutes, but if you have a question or if you have an experience with Global Read Aloud that you want to share out, please do so.
Okay, so another question. It's a lot of information you gave us, and I really love the way it's organized, but I'm really thinking, you know, school's around the corner, going to the class, I'm like, oh my gosh, I know Joanne knows all the answers. Can I really bug her? Do you want to answer that for everyone?
So I mean, I'm not going to say I have all the answers because I've only done this once. At the same time, you can totally bug me. So, you know, you can email me, you can tweet at me. I think, yeah, my Twitter and my email were on that earlier page, but I will also type them in the chat, but I think they were on that earlier slide too. But yeah, totally. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert. I just consider myself very passionate about this, but I will help you out however I can. And again, too, I know, because it can be super overwhelming when you're starting, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this happen? But that's why, like, I try to tell people, you know, obviously first thing, pick a book, right? Find a supporter, do what you want to do from there. But do not feel like you need to do everything. Don't feel like you have to try all of the different connector tools or all the different ed tech tools or connections or whatever. You know, pick maybe one or two things to start out with, and then, you know, see what you want to do from there. And maybe you want to add on another one as you go, or maybe you just want to stick to those one or two things, or maybe you just find one class to work with in an in-depth way. You know, because the way I did it, I know was more, I mean, it was valuable and it was very impactful for our students, but it was a little more surface level at times than I would have liked, but that was just kind of the nature of trying to build those connections with the whole school, right? So, you know, if you can have, if you have a classroom where you can get classroom teachers to build kind of some deeper connections, you know, then maybe they're just going to one tool in the same class multiple times instead of looking for different things, and they'll get more meaningful conversations being able to go more in depth. But yeah, like bug me away. I'm good. I'm good.
So Joanne, I really want to thank you for your time and all your wisdom here. I know the next session is getting ready to log in, but thank you so much for all that you share and all that you continue to do.
Yep, thanks for coming in, Katie, and thanks everybody else. And if you do think of a question, I mean, I'll stick around for a little bit longer. So feel free to shout it out, but I also know that other people will be getting ready to go. But two, feel free to tweet, email, whatever, and I will help out however I can.